There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another review, this time of a novel from 2019 out of America, Gods with a Little G by Tupelo Hassman. I don't know much about Tupelo Hassman, except that she lives in America and I think she's quite young. This is her second novel. I don't know where she lives, I don't know where she's from. This novel is set in California, in a small town called Rosary, California. And I really enjoyed it. It was a 4-star read from me. When I give a book a 4-star rating, it means that I usually have a fairly long list of things that I didn't like, which prevented me from fully loving the novel. But a 4-star rating is a good rating. I really enjoyed it. I did it on audio. Had to pick up the hardcover because it was so attractive, but I did the entire book on audio, and that was a great way to experience it. Gods with a Little G, and by the way, the title is spelled all lowercase. I can't show you because it's all written in this kind of script, but there shouldn't be any uppercase characters when you render the title. It's set in this rinky-dink little town, Rosary, California. It's not, as you might expect, a Catholic town, although I think it historically was. The main character and first-person narrator is Helen Ledbetter, and Helen is 16, I believe. And Rosary, California is so fundamentalist Christian that she is dying of how oppressively religious in that horrific fundamentalist way the town is. And she and her gang of high school friends are all misfits. None of them are particularly religious, and they're trying to lead what in other parts of America or Canada would be pretty typical adolescent lives, but under the oppressive, just the Bible-thumping bullshit is just lathered on so thick in the environment in which they grow up that they seem like criminals. I love the first-person voice of Helen Ledbetter. It had some shortcomings, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I got to know Helen so well through this novel, and she was recovering from the death of her mother maybe 3, 4, 5 years before, and living with a rather distant father who was a postal worker and devout fundamentalist Christian deep in his mourning. In terms of the adults in the town, she's closest to her Aunt Bev, and her Aunt Bev is a pariah in the town. She is a psychic, and Helen helps her Aunt Bev out at her psychic studio, and there's a lot of things that go on in that psychic reading studio that seem to go above and beyond the call of what a psychic reader would ordinarily do. There's a group of friends, and rather than call them a group of misfits, they are called dickheads. That is the name I believe they gave to themselves, and that's the name by which the group is known. And they hang out in a tire yard, and the owner of the tire yard lets them hang out there, and he has some rather perverted reasons for allowing this congregation, but he also sells them beer. Helen has the hots for her classmate whose nickname is Bird, and that lust that she has for Bird is complicated by the fact that fairly early in the novel, her father and Bird's divorced or widowed, I can't remember, but Bird's mother start dating. I'm not going to say very much more about the plot, other than that the new kids in town are a brother and sister. I think Winthrop is the same age as Helen, and he has a sister, Rain, who I can't remember if she is a bit older or a bit younger. Helen makes fast friends with Winthrop and Rain and spends countless hours at their house, where the three of them take turns reading the pornographic scenes from Winthrop and Rain's very Bible-thumping father's stash of adult novels from the 1970s or whatever, and getting a sex education that way. That's about all I need to say to you about the plot. I am so allergic to YA fiction that I might die if I read more than a page. This is not a YA novel, although it is a novel about high school. It is written for adults. It is a wonderfully literary novel. I think if you like YA, you would probably like this, but if you hate YA like I do, I think you still might too. What didn't work for me in this novel is that the cast of adult characters that we get to know well are not Bible-thumping idiots. They are complex and nuanced, and even if they are religious, they show a human side and are compassionate to varying degrees. Yet the way that Helen describes the environment, like there's no sex education allowed and people are escaping to the nearest larger town for abortions and transgendered counseling, like there's nothing like that permitted in this town, but yet we don't meet the people that are like that. So it's just like this generalized description. We take Helen's word for it, but I wish that there were more examples of those kind of people to make it feel more real. That was my main complaint, and it didn't prevent me from really enjoying this story. The other thing is that while this was not a sexually explicit novel, and I am not a prude, there were a few scenes relating to sexual matters where I felt like the author was overdoing it in trying to gross the reader out. Like there's a scene with a man who's just finished masturbating in his car, and he wipes his hand at the top of the inside of his car, and we get all the gory details of what that was like in a way that just like, I don't know what this is adding to the story. There was just a couple times like that where I thought, what kind of shock value is she trying to, what is the purpose of this? It's not necessary as far as I was concerned. And again, I'm not a prude. I enjoyed the way that Helen discovers her sexuality and discovers the difference between sex and love, and there's all kinds of stuff that was nourishing and connected to the development of a story and the development of a character. But there was just a few times where it was like, ew, why did I need to know about this? Why did she need to include that? So there's that. And the one other thing that I struggled with, but I've thought about it for about 10 days since I finished the book, and I have talked myself out of this being a criticism, but we are so stuck in Helen's point of view and we don't get the point of view of anybody else. And that works in large part for the story, but I didn't ever really know how much of Helen's perception of the other characters, the teenagers and the adults, was because of her own stuff, or whether she was seeing them clearly. But it didn't take away from it being a really great novel, but it just left me with that question. And I think that was not a shortcoming. I wondered about it as I was reading it, and now that I've had, like I say, several days to think about it, it's like, no, I think that's what she intended, and that worked well. So with those few provisos, I very much recommend Gods with a Little G by Tupelo Hassman to you. Check it out. Thanks for watching.